welcome you all to this town hall this evening. Much appreciate all of the folks joining us tonight. Welcome to Dane Lloyd, the Member of Parliament for Sturgeon River Parkland, who is directly southeast to our riding. So I have to drive through his riding to get to the airport. And he is a newly minted Member of Parliament, got elected here in 2019. And I've gotten to know him over the last couple of years, and I've been really excited to work hand in hand with him. He actually came up and did a fundraiser with me a while back, and I was after that they were all the people at the fundraiser were saying, well, Dane Lloyd for Prime Minister, because he has a compelling speech there for sure. Dane's married with a little girl. Dane,
Yes.
what's the little girl's name?
Her name's Brooke. She's turning 1 this month, so she's a pandemic baby. Had a little difficulty putting her to bed tonight, but we're making do.
Okay. Well, we haven't been hearing. I haven't been hearing her anyways on the Zoom chat, but nonetheless, if she happens to join us, I'm sure that won't be a big problem. So, Dane is also a member of the Canadian military. Dane, you should tell us a little bit about that.
Well, before I was elected, I was serving as an infantry officer in the Canadian Forces Reserves, and I was actually in the summer of 2017, before I got elected, I was in New Brunswick, completing my infantry platoon commander training at Gagetown. And when Ronna Ambrose resigned, I told my warrant officer after three weeks in the woods, I said, "Yeah, I need to get off the base so I can run for office." And the warrant sort of looked at me. I don't think they'd ever had a request like that before. Plenty of other people had come up with some real doozies to try to get out of the military, but they never heard that one. And the great thing is they even let me stay in the military, so I've been serving sort of part time since I was elected in 2017. So I'm the only serving member of the Canadian Forces in Parliament, and it's a great honor to be serving in both those ways.
Very cool, very cool. And you grew up here in Northern Alberta?
Yes, indeed. Yep. Grew up around St. Albert, and my family farms seed potatoes out in Spruce Grove. So a lot of
Okay.
time working on the farm growing up, and a lot of time out in Sturgeon County with friends. I went to Edmonton Christian School in the West End. A lot of folks from near Landia way went to that school, or at least their relatives did, and so yeah, really good connection to the community out there.
Very cool, very cool. And the your interest in politics. How did you get interested in politics?
Oh, I mean, your family talks about it around the kitchen table. You sort of internalize it, pick it up when you're growing up, and being from Alberta, we definitely knew we were conservatives in our household, and I decided I wanted to get involved, and I really liked politics, so I started door knocking when I was about 13. I think that was the 2004 election, and um, and it's funny because I'm serving with some people in Parliament today who were elected in the 2004 election. So I say to them, "Well, I was in junior high when you got elected, and now I'm your colleague." But um, and then I got involved in a nomination, and the new MP at the time let me work in his office. That was a great opportunity. Went to university and just love bringing my values to the office, and I'm really proud to be serving as the rural economic development shadow minister, because I feel very passionate about rural areas. Our ridings are very similar. Ours is a little bit closer to Edmonton, so we're a little denser in some ways, with Spruce Grove and Stony Plain and Morinville being somewhat more bedroom communities. But I think our common ties with agriculture, with having areas that have low broadband, infrastructure needs, needing multiple levels of government to work together to build things like community centers, recreational centers. Um, Recently, it's amazing all of the facets that you can deal with when you're in rural economic development. So, one today is the amount of money that the government has been spending on advertising in local newspapers. And our colleague Martin Shields actually noted in an email with some really great statistics that the government is advertising almost exclusively digitally, which was very interesting to me because we know in our towns like Barrhead, Westlock, all these towns that people may not primarily get their news from digital sources like Facebook, CNN, Rebel, Fox News, all these things, but they get it from their local newspapers. And if the government isn't advertising in these papers, then that really hurts, and causes some of our rural papers to go under. And so that's something I'm definitely going to be raising in my role. On top of the rural broadband issue is the need to support our local papers when the government is advertising. We're not talking about government bailing out newspapers like the Liberals have with like a big fund. We're talking about putting advertisements in papers that can help these papers be financially successful while at the same time keeping our rural citizens who use these papers informed.
Mhm. Well, tonight we've got many municipal leaders and also folks that are directly involved in delivering the internet to rural Canadians and rural Albertans on the call. And so Dane has prepared a bit of a PowerPoint presentation. Dane, if you want to just take that away, I'd happily just turn the floor over to you for a little bit here.
Well, thank you so much, and forgive me. I'm not. I've been put in this role, and it's good to have so many experts on the call here. Because the important thing about a town hall is I'm not here to tell you guys all what I know. I'm here to learn what you know and take that feedback to Ottawa, where unfortunately we're not in government and we're not crafting the policies, but I do speak to the ministers involved and I have raised certain issues. And so, I'm really interested in hearing some of the feedback. But today, we're going to go over this PowerPoint where I'm going to touch on a number of issues in a high level way. For many of you, this might be information that you know very well, but for some of you, it might be information that you're just learning for the first time. So I'm very pleased to be presenting to this community. We'll go to the next slide, please. So I'm just going to have to move my bar here so I can see you. So the Conservative Party, one of our big priorities is, we are very predominant outside of Atlantic Canada and Quebec in a lot of the rural areas, and so we've always had the backs of our rural communities, and as MPs like Arnold and I, who represent rural areas, we have heard loud and clear for years and years about the need to not only create broadband infrastructure, but also to ensure that it's affordable. And over the past 5.5 years, we've seen the Liberals announce and re-announce and even re-announce their re-announcements on their several initiatives to deal with rural broadband, and uh, that has been repeated in the latest budget, where we've seen some significant numbers thrown out. I believe the total funding that we're looking at for the next few years is 2.75 billion, and that some of that is going out the door fairly rapidly, but other monies are going out much more slowly. The government's goal is to achieve 50/10, so 50 megabytes per second download speeds and 10 megabits per second streaming speeds by 2030 for 98% of Canadian households. So that's sort of like the gold standard. But one of the things we know is that, with the Internet of Things, we call it, basically your refrigerator will be using data. There's all sorts of tools. Even tractors are getting much more sophisticated, that we're going to need faster and faster internet. So we need the government to continue to invest along with the private sector to create this infrastructure so that we can thrive as rural communities. So we've had some issues. The government has created this rapid response stream, and the goal of the rapid response stream, I think it was a good goal. Unfortunately, it closed back in February or January of this year, so it was fairly quick. It was announced in the fall and closed, and the goal of that program was to fund projects that could be brought up and running by November of this year. So fairly quick. That's the name, the rapid response stream. One of the things that I noted, though, and I raised this to the minister, is that the government only put $150 million behind this. And I think it was something closer to $450 million worth of projects actually applied. So that's about $300 million that the government could have invested in rapid projects, but they didn't because they limited the scope of the program. And I'm not necessarily saying that we need to spend additional monies on the program, but I did raise to the minister that if there are great projects that can do it, why are we setting a limit on the amount of money we can spend? I mean, if we have 2.75 billion over the next few years, and you can get $450 million worth of rural broadband projects done in the next year, don't cut that by 2/3. Just put the funding up front. So that's something that we've been advocating for. Next slide. So this is somewhat of a more technical issue. For many years, Canada, we have something called spectrum, and spectrum is basically the totality of the radio waves, the television waves. You can't see it, but it's all around us. It's what the wireless internet rides on. It's what your cell phone rides on, and it's basically an essential resource for 21st century technology. Um, and these frequencies are not an unlimited resource. There's only a certain spectrum or a certain bandwidth. Think about it like your car radio. I mean, you have your FM and your AM, and you can only crank it to one side or the other so far before getting back to the beginning. So it's like a circle. It's not an infinite resource that goes from one end to the other. And the government of Canada, as the custodian of public resources, much like the government of Alberta is the owner of our oil resources, the government of Canada is the owner of our spectrum resources. So spectrum transmits through the air using antennas, towers, telephone poles, um, and they cover communities with wireless connectivity. Um, some people use wired networks through fiber. Um, and then many rural and remote communities have some geographical challenges. So, for example, in like very forested areas or very hilly or mountainous areas, it impedes the ability for towers to spread these radio waves. And so it necessitates more investment in things like um, physical wires and fiber. Next slide. So, with enough spectrum deployed, we believe that rural Canadians can access the speeds that they need that would make them more equivalent to their urban peers. Now, I don't think the government will ever be able to achieve 100% coverage for all of Canada, although we're seeing some really interesting developments with satellites. So, Telestat, we're seeing Elon Musk come forward with, you may have heard of his satellite company. And these satellites are proving to be very popular and very successful, although they do have some upfront costs in the very remote areas. And so something I've raised to the minister is that when we're putting forward broadband funding, we cannot pick and choose which means of delivery. So we can't say all the funding should go towards towers, all the funding should go towards fiber. We need to take a technology neutral approach, and we need to say what is going to enable most Canadians to access affordable internet. And for some Canadians, it's not feasible to get towers or fiber to them. So we're talking about satellites. We know that government funding is a critical component of this, um, but unfortunately, the government the government is not going to be putting up enough money to achieve this goal. And it's really important that we get the private sector to step up. And but without the access to the spectrum, um, we're not going to be able to serve our communities. And as you can imagine, much like our oil sands, you have companies competing for the rights to develop that resource. And in Canada, we have several large telecommunications companies that compete with each other through spectrum auctions to gain access to this finite resource. And occasionally, there's sort of old resources that aren't being used as much anymore that we have found that have been repurposed for new ways. So just because the spectrum has been auctioned in the past doesn't mean that it can't be freed up for the future. And it's not like a resource that once you use it, it's gone. Like it's always there. It's like buying space in the newspaper, or using up space on a shelf. Once the product is gone, you can put new product on there, so it can always be recycled. Next slide. So this is the big question here: is why is the spectrum not being deployed in rural communities? So the government has created a practice, and this was under the Conservative government in the past, and it's continued under the Liberals, where we do set aside. So we've earmarked 40% of the available spectrum, and this has been set aside because it's a goal of the government to increase competition in the telecommunications sector. We want new companies to come in to challenge the incumbent players, the Rogers, the Shaws, the Teluses, the Bells, and we want these new players to lower costs for Canadians. Unfortunately, uh, the unintended side effect of these set asides has been to the remaining 60%. The companies will spend exorbitant amounts of money in order to obtain the other 60%. And these spectrum auctions will bring in billions and billions of dollars for the taxpayers, which is good in one sense, but in the other sense, it's also one of the reasons why Canada has much higher cell phone bills and less investment in rural broadband than other countries around the world, because these companies are going into debt. They're raising money to compete in these spectrum auctions where they're spending billions of dollars that they could be investing in growing their networks. And then the remaining 40% set aside, unfortunately, many of the companies that have received this in the past, because they're trying to scale up their company, um, they're focused on where they can get the best return on investment for their company. And the best return on investment is not investing in places like Stony Plain or Barhead. It's investing in places like Edmonton, Toronto, Vancouver. And so now we're seeing, yes, there's competition in the big urban areas, but now we're not seeing investment. So we're seeing how government policy is really creating an unintended consequence where we're not seeing the investment in rural areas that we need. And the government is attempting to fix that by putting forward these billions of dollars. But I would argue that perhaps they wouldn't need to put forward as many of these billions of dollars if they rejigged the policy to achieve better outcomes for rural Canadians. Next slide. So we're going to go over budget 2021 here. So this has been the budget that's been 2 years waiting. Um, the government has spent an exorbitant amount in this budget, and we could argue over the size of the deficit. And a lot of people have said, "Well, Dane, don't you like that they spent money on this thing or that thing?" And I think there's a lot of wonderful things that the government has spent money on, but in economics, you learn that there's no such thing as a free lunch, and every dollar that's spent today is a dollar that has to be paid back tomorrow. So as much as any given investment can be a good investment. We're dealing with a totality of the budget. So I am pleased that we have more investment in rural broadband. I think the big question will be how effective that investment is. So they promised an additional $1 billion on top of what they previously announced. They had previously announced about 1.75 billion, of which 150 million was the previous stated rapid response stream, which has already been allocated. So this 2.75 billion is the goal to achieve 98% of the country having broadband by 2026 and 100% by 2030. I think that this is largely an achievable goal, even though there are some people in areas that are very, very remote. Next slide. So, despite their repeated promises over the past 5 years, we know that there are so many communities that are struggling to connect. And there was a story that I raised in the House of Commons together with one of our Quebec colleagues, Richard Lahou, where we actually had the government spending millions of dollars to putting in the backbone fiber infrastructure into a town that was about 40 minutes north of Ottawa in Quebec. And it was interesting because the fiber ran through the town, and I don't know if you have any sort of resort communities in your riding, Arnold, where you might have a town and then you have cabins on the lake, and I can imagine there's some very nice cabins in your riding on the lake, and in this riding in Quebec there was no different, where the fiber ran all the way through the town, but nobody in the town could get access because the last mile infrastructure wasn't connected to the line. And what we actually found is that the line went to this sort of cottage community along the lake, and the CEO of Bell Canada owned one of these cabins, and they all got hooked up. All the rich millionaires who owned, cottages on the lake got hooked up. And meanwhile, the line that the taxpayer had paid for was running through the town, and nobody in the town could get high-speed internet. Like, they couldn't get it to I think they could get it to the school and the community center, but the last mile wasn't going to the people in this poor community. So we're seeing that sometimes, government with the best intentions, the policies aren't achieving, and we need to follow through to ensure that we can get that last mile funding. So the government really likes to make these big announcements and splash the money out and say the projects, and then a couple of years later, because this funding for that Quebec project was announced in 2018, but we only found out in 2021 that none of the people in the town were actually getting their broadband. So we have to stay really on top of these things. And as conservatives, we're focused on not only putting the money in towards getting this backbone in place, but also working with municipalities, community organizations, and of course the providers to ensure that we can build the capacity as communities to ensure that not only does the wire get into the town, but that the wire is connected to the actual, to the schools, to the community centers, to the libraries, and to the residents in their houses. Next slide. So this is something that I've raised with the minister recently, and it's something that they're looking into. We don't have information on this yet, but we'll pass it along to Arnold. And if any of you want this information, once we get it, we'd be happy to pass it along. But something that I have observed, and you guys on the call, maybe if you have any questions or comments on this, is that some towns, they might not have the administration, especially in a very small towns. They might not have the expertise. They might not have the capacity to put forward a grant application for broadband. They might not even be aware that there is an application open. And I know certainly as MPs, we try to do our best job to inform people when these applications are open, but oftentimes the government isn't really eager to tell us about them, or they're just not doing a good job of communicating them. So what we're asking for is that they create a sort of concierge service where it would be a number, an email that a community could call, and it would be like having somebody on your town administration who is an expert in writing an application and knowing what is suitable for a community on broadband. And I think this service would be really helpful for a lot of our smaller communities that don't have that capacity, so that they could be brought up to the capacity so that they can make these applications and get the funding going to their communities. So that's something that we're going to be pushing for as conservatives. Next slide. So this is very topical in the news recently, the proposed takeover of Shaw by Rogers. I'm sure most of you have heard about this. We've had some skepticism. We've had some people saying that they think this is great. I'm not going to be taking a stand on this. I think it's important that we do our due diligence and we research the deal and we see what the companies have to say about this. But just taking it at face value, Rogers is telling folks that if they're allowed to take over, if the Competition Bureau allows this to go through, that they will create a increased investment of $2.5 billion in 5G infrastructure. And we know that 5G is essential for accessing the spectrum that is needed to really power the next generation of technological products. Um, and this is on top of the investment that they've already put in. So they're not just recycling their talking points and saying it's the same money that we would have put in anyways. This is new funding. And they've also said that they're going to increase funding for infrastructure in rural and indigenous communities. Um, there are some concerns about competition because you have two. Shaw was supposed to be one of these new players we talked about. It was given some spectrum at a set aside rate. Is Rogers going to be able to take over that spectrum? There's a lot of questions about that. I'm not sure if they will be taking over all of that spectrum. Certainly, the Teluses and the Bells will want that spectrum to be re-auctioned and redistributed for fairness in their eyes. But we think this could be positive if Rogers does everything that they say they're going to do. They're going to be building a headquarters in Calgary, which will create jobs, and they want to increase their investment in rural areas. And they've said that most of that investment will be targeted towards Alberta. So if they do what they say they're going to do, which I'm always skeptical when we get promises from big corporations, I think it will be good, but the devil's always in the details. Next slide. So with that, just want to say thank you so much for my quick presentation here. Um, and I hope this has been somewhat informative for folks, and I'm looking forward to being informed by you with your questions and with your comments. So I did see we had some written ones here, but maybe Arnold, do you want to moderate and you can
Yeah,
kind
for
of
sure.
dictate to me? Thanks.
Yeah, for sure. I'm not sure if folks have the raised hand function or not. Other than uh, Donna, you were able to unmute earlier. Could you just tell me if you do you have a raised hand function there?
Yes, we do.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Oh, I see Doug's raising his hand there too. So if anyone's got a question, just please put up your use your raise hand function, and then I'll let you in, and let's have a bit of a discussion here. So, Karina Williams, please unmute your mic and ask away.
I did see that Karina wrote down her question. Is it the same question, Karina?
It is. So I can let you read it. Thank you.
Yes, I did read it. And one thing I will say is somebody who represents a riding that is right next to the city of Edmonton, you might be surprised that the internet access in Parkland County, right next to the city of Edmonton, is just as bad as it might be in the rural Peace Country. And a lot of people are confused because they think that it should be much better because you're so close to a city center, but in reality, it's just as bad. Um, and so I think one of the reasons why the grant money is given to these larger communities, as I said, um, is because they have the capacity to write the grants, because they have the population that makes it more desirable, or at least marginally desirable, for the telecom companies to partner with government to make an investment. And that's why we believe the government needs to step up more in more remote areas to ensure that that more of that burden is being taken on by the government, so that it makes the telecommunications companies actually invest in getting the job done. Um, Now, the trouble with that is that we're seeing more and more taxpayer dollars being spent, and so another thing that we're looking at is when we're talking about auctioning the spectrum, as we've talked about, is rather than trying to get $5 billion off of a spectrum auction, what we're looking at is saying we'll auction this for less, but we're going to ask the companies to create outcomes. And if that outcome is that you will increase rural broadband coverage by 40%, and if you don't achieve that, then that spectrum will revert back to the government. So it will create sort of an outcomes-based system, to not only ensure that the companies are paying the government for the spectrum, but they're also committing to expanding rural and remote broadband. And if they don't achieve the targets that they agreed to during the auction, then they will lose access to that broadband, and it can be sold off to the next highest bidder, or it can be re-auctioned, creating new revenue for the taxpayers. But obviously, the hope is that the companies will invest in growing the infrastructure. So I think the concierge service that I talked about will be very helpful for communities in more remote areas, like in my riding, Lac St. Anne County. Is much more remote than, say, Spruce Grove. They could definitely use that service, and I know some towns and communities in Arnold's riding there, I think would find that service very helpful. But if you think it's helpful, let me know. If you don't think it would be very helpful, then please let me know as well. The second question is, Northern Sunrise was denied our application as we do not own any towers, was what we were advised, and this is making it extremely difficult to apply. So I'm not an expert in the grant writing process, but I suspect the government is looking at people who have existing towers, as you said. But I can see I can totally understand your frustration. If you're not getting the financial support, you can't build the towers, and if you can't build the towers, then how are you supposed to get the financial support to deploy the broadband? So that's also about the capacity building aspect. There is we need to work with our communities to bring up the abilities, financially, logistically, and bureaucratically, in order to be able to access these resources.
All right, I've got the next one up. I got Doug, and then Diane, and then Bill. So Doug Drews, please unmute yourself.
Sure thing. Thank you, Arnold. Thanks for doing this. Rural broadband is one of my favorite topics. We can talk about it all the time. I'm kind of reminded of a quote that goes around from time to time that everyone complains about the weather, but nobody ever seems to do anything about it. Well, now it's kind of like everybody complains about lack of broadband, but nobody seems to do anything about it too as well. So I just want to share some of our observations and experiences here at the County of Barrhead. And in the last last year, I guess, or so, there have been two or more of the internet service providers that came to us looking for endorsements so they could write their grant applications to do work. And some of that work is like adding fiber optics to transit fiber to their towers to reinforce their backbone to enable them to give more bandwidth and raise their speeds, which is all very good. But we at the county, we've come to the conclusion that we need to spend a little money ourselves, and so we've are looking to have a report commissioned for us. And what it is it's very simple. Within our municipality, the County of Barrhead, we need to know what companies are actually there offering internet services to our public, and then with that, we need to know what kind of coverage they claim to have and what's their product. Is it a low speed product? Are they able to offer a high speed product? Or are they just limited to just basic services? And where are their structures? It may be very easy pickings in some places to help them complement something to serve a population that's nearby. We don't know that. There's so much that you don't know that's out there. And then the other part of it is so how many customers do they serve? There's a critical mass that they need to be profitable. We understand business. They're not going to make massive investments for very remote areas where nobody is around. In fact, one of the companies came to us and said that that's what we're reserving the satellite capacity for, is those people who are just, there is no way that you can hit them with a radio tower or with fiber optics. So we're hoping that they can save that option for them and make it more viable. So that's part of the thing is an information gathering process. We also need to be able to work in a partnership, or if the opportunity arises, to apply for the Universal Broadband Fund grants. But as it is, not owning a municipal utility, internet utility, or having a partnership with it, we're not eligible to apply for any money under the Universal Broadband Fund. So we're kind of caught, I guess, maybe in the beginning of the process here for us, looking at what the most viable options are. But it's an issue. I can tell you that for some people, there's never enough. They want as much as they can get. And for others, and I know some examples in this municipality and other communities across Alberta too as well, we're giving the choices of having a very a Cadillac type of service and coming at a cost, and then another option of having a lower cost of option with just the basic services. Not everybody goes to the better. There's some folks who are just content with just sending emails back and forth and the very basic services. So it's a tough nut to crack. I think most of us would like to have better services, but not everyone is willing to pay for it. So I often joke with our council too as well. If we're going to throw in hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars into getting broadband into every household in the County of Barrhead, we might as well just buy everybody a Starlink system, just and cut through the BS and just be done with it, because the other processes may just have us beating our heads against the wall. So it's frustrating, but like I say, we're finally starting to take some positive steps, I think, around that, and at least try to find out what we don't know. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks, guys.
Hey, thanks, Doug. I'm just going to put on your radar, and I'm not sure if Bard County is part of Growth Alberta. I'm pretty sure that Woodlands County is. And Growth Alberta did an asset map. So they basically hired a private investigator to go around northern Alberta and just kind of map out, hey, where do we have fiber? Where do we have towers? Where do we have all the internet infrastructure? To exactly your point is that many of the companies are doing redundant things, like they're running fiber. One guy's running fiber on one side of the road, the other company's running fiber on the other side of the road. In reality, they could probably both use the same fiber. And that I think is where government has an opportunity to come in and be the policeman, put down some build the rules of the road, right? Like we all use all the highways and the roads together, and we have some basic rules that allow us all to drive down the road without crashing into each other. And that's something that I think is that you're pointing out, is that all of the companies are kind of doing their own thing, and yet there is opportunities to maybe fiber, for example, has endless at this point seems to have endless opportunities. It just, we aren't necessarily playing together. So I don't know, Dane, you got anything to add to that?
Well, thanks for the great feedback, Doug. And I think it's a great thing that your community is considering putting up funding to this, because I think there is a huge benefit to our constituents when we invest in broadband. I read a study that said that the average home that is connected to high-speed internet goes up in value by $5,000. And so, we can see how, increasing the value of people's homes, that leads to increased assessed tax revenues. It leads to, increased wealth for homeowners. And we know in our rural areas that keeping people living in our rural areas is very important. And people will reinvest in homes where they can access high-speed internet. So we see there's huge benefits there. And then obviously there's benefits with, telehealth, with home learning for students. And there's so many, or like running a home-based business over the internet. So obviously there's so many spin-off benefits. One model that I've seen that's been somewhat successful across the country is municipal governments banding together and creating a nonprofit organization. So I think of something called SWIFT, which is the Southwestern Ontario Fiber Development Group, and SWIFT is a combination of municipalities across Southern Ontario that work together to achieve mutual growth, and they'll apply for government funding, and that creates the capacity. So maybe you're looking at Barhead working with different municipalities, and everyone just chipping in a little bit, and the goal is to work together to achieve, get those big funding asks in. And something you said about Starlink, we know that Starlink is going to be the most feasible thing for some of our remote communities, and that's why I'm saying to the government that they need to take a technologically neutral approach. We can't just say it's got to be all fiber, it's got to be all towers. We need to allow communities and the companies to work within the funding arrangement to figure out what is the best solution for each and every community. And sometimes that solution will be through satellite. I guess next question.
Diane?
Yes, thanks. It's great for us to be part of this town hall. I just want to mention, you mentioned a report that was done by Growth Alberta. That report was done by NADC, and it's for all north of Alberta. It was finalized in September 2018, I think, and you can go on their website. It's Northern Alberta Economic Development, and the report is accessed for everyone. And so here in our region, we are part of a big project. It's called Aurora Project, and that project submit a grant application to the UBF, and the total house is 3,500 houses who will have fiber to the premises everywhere in different county, starting from Athabasca to Saddle Hill County. Okay, the Highway 2 up to the Highway 49, up to almost the line of the BC. So my question, I don't know if you know, but the new funding that the government include in their budget, the extra 1 billion. Do you know if we will have another intake for that amount, or it's just bonus of it will be like 275 billion without any more intake? Do you know if they will get the money?
So the program will remain open for new applicants over the next few years until the time period ends, like where the funding could lapse. So what we're seeing right now is there's an old fund that's lapsing this year, I believe. It's called the Connect to Innovate Fund. And it was funded several years ago, and its program funding is lapsing this year. So any funding that's left over will be returned to the fiscal framework. Obviously, the hope is that the funding will be used. Anytime we put funding up, we want it to be used. So the additional billion is going into the Universal Broadband Fund. So that program application is open. There was the rapid response stream, which is closed. But
the
yes,
other one was closed at the end of March.
Yes, so there will be another intake on that. The additional billion is not just for the existing project.
Okay, I'm hoping that the other intake will be after we got the news if we have the grant or not. So so we will have probably another intake. That's good because we're working on this as plan B if our plan A doesn't work, because it's a big project. And honestly, the limit that the government give right now, 50-10, I think it's just a band-aid on it's not a long-term solution, because in 5 years our technology will take more data and more and more and more, and we need something, really strong to support that. Satellite Starlink is a great thing, yes, but down the road we will face the same problem that we have right now. Okay, and for businesses and even some house with the student at home, university at home, a 50-10 is not enough. It's not enough, and a lot of people doesn't have that. I agree, but we have to look long term, and we need to do something, because all our rural, for example, my Smoky River region, I have 5 municipalities in this region, and I have 4,500 people living here. So it's small, really, really small. Sorry. It's really, really small. So if I wait until a big company comes in and go in the MD to put a better service, we will wait a long time, and it will just be a band-aid. It's not a long-term solution. So that's.
Thank you for the great feedback, Diane. And that's why, we're really pushing, for the companies to do with the 5G towers, the new towers, and also the fiber, because we know that that's the infrastructure that's going to be able to sustain those higher speeds that we're going to need in the future. The other thing is that the Universal Broadband Fund is not the only funding that's available. The CRTC itself is putting forward some funding. So that's an important funding stream to also think about. And then also if people are more risk averse, there is going to be the Canada Infrastructure Bank, which has been a very problematic creation of the Liberal government. But I have seen that there have been funding a lot of broadband projects in very remote areas.
I agree with that, but it's for big company. It's not for small. I think your minimum needs to be 100 million project. If you are a small company, you're too small. So I know they have some lobbying going to drop that minimum to 50 million, and
Yes.
maybe we will have a chance. But right now, the way it's set up, it's just the TELUS, Shaw, those big company who has project that much money, because the smaller company cannot have that. The project, it's way too big for them. They are just,
They're clearly very on top of this issue, and yeah, that 100 million needs to be dropped, because we're seeing so many rural communities being left out because they don't
yes.
meet those. And we've seen that with other government programs as well. Even if we're talking about a rec center in a community, I mean, they can't meet the minimum spending requirements, and
No.
that's just ridiculous. It should be by how many people it helps, not by how much it costs.
Yes, and the interest rate is really low, and it's based on a long-term period, so it's great. But the 10 millions, the 100 million is way too high. We look at that co-op or putting utility in the past. The provincial government at one point has some money for that, but when the government changed, all that funding was gone. And for our region, we are not that wealthy, so we cannot afford that, even with other county around us joining us with, we were working with Big Lake on that, and we tried that. And to support or to be successful for that, we need some provincial money too, not only the federal. And it's hard because all those grant is gone here. So
Absolutely, Dan. I will say, Arnold and team, I do only have about 10 minutes left, and we did have a couple other questions. I just wanted to go over quickly. Sorry, Dan. Thank you, Diane. That was
not a
excellent
problem.
feedback. I know Kevin Smar, you had a very much more technical question. And I would say that even though, the TELUS hub is offering you 25 megabits, even though they've taken over a service that offered 50 megabits, I mean, they're still going to be required to up service, and it's unfortunate in your case that it seems that the service has gone down, or the service has gone down. And I know TELUS is planning on making a large rural broadband announcement in the coming days. I received an invitation for something related to that, so stay tuned on that. Scott Brownlee, you are an ISP provider. We love our ISP providers. You're doing a great job of holding the big players accountable and keeping them honest. And I totally hear your frustration. With these companies, often it's not because they're the best at providing the service, it's because they're the best at writing the grants and talking to the bureaucrats and the politicians and getting their funding approved, but not very good at actually providing the service in these communities. I don't believe the federal government is interested in owning like a pipeline. I think they're interested in subsidizing private players to run the infrastructure. The one thing is that if it is going through the Canada Infrastructure Bank, it would technically, the debt would be owned by the Canadian taxpayer. So I don't think the government is planning of owning wireless networks on their own, but they'd rather let the private companies do that. And then I think we had one last question from Mr. Robert Willing.
Robert, I see your hand is up there if you want to unmute.
Sure. Yeah, thanks very much for taking the question. It's not really a question, maybe a little bit of an observation. I did send you a message, and I hope you read my frustration. This was through the email, my frustration in the state of broadband up north here. I mean, we're struggling up here. We have nothing up here. And I mean that. We have been promised for years that stuff is going to get done. Nothing happens. There's all of these studies, all of these policies. Nothing is going on. And I don't know what the problem is, other than that because the government can't put the facilities in themselves, the municipalities can't afford to because they don't have the towers. The telcos are the ones that we have to rely on. And if people out there think that they're going to get 5G up here, well, just read the statistics about 5G and figure out how many towers you're going to have. Minimum 1,000 feet between towers. So just Northern Sunrise, how many towers are you going to have to put in your area to get 5G? It's not going to happen. But even 4G, we don't even have that up here. And I mean, I did a speed test here in a Zoom meeting 2 weeks ago. I had 0.1 megabit per second download speed, 0.1. And the cities are crying because they've got 100 megabits. Like, give me a break. I'm fed up. Like, I mean, I don't even know what to do. We've gone to TELUS. We've gone to, we haven't contacted Bell, is the only one we haven't contacted. They're fine. Yeah, put up a tower. We'll put all our equipment on your tower. But what they're doing now is they're selling these TELUS hubs, and they're degrading the phone system so bad that we don't even have cell service in some areas. So it's a real problem. And if you guys can figure it out, well, good for you. But I mean, I've been on this broadband thing for 10 years. I haven't seen anything yet.
All right. Robert, where exactly are you located?
I'm located approximately 15 kilometers southwest of Peace River.
Okay.
Yeah, Robert, I'm not going to come on here and make the same excuses that I'm sure you've heard. Suffice it to say, it is a massive logistical challenge to connect all of Canada, especially we're second largest country in the world. But we are a technologically advanced country, and we're a wealthy country, and there is no excuse for us not to be able to get a certain minimum standard of broadband, and that's what the government is saying they want to achieve with this latest iteration of their funding. And it's something that, as Arnold and I are in opposition right now, it's our role to hold the government accountable to make sure that they achieve those ends. So we're going to be holding their feet to the fire on that. And you can be rest assured that the Conservatives, if we do get into government, like, we're going to double down on that investment, because we know how important it is for our rural areas. And we, like, I mean, just talking about agriculture, for example, we have 5 private members' bills on agriculture. Anything from exempting them from the carbon tax to allowing family farms to be passed down without being hit with huge tax penalties. And on telecommunications, we had a colleague, Dan Mazier, who's putting up a private member's bill. And this actually addresses a question somebody earlier had about forcing the telecommunication companies to publish their speed rates at peak times and other times, so that communities, when they're choosing their cell phone provider, can look at that and be like, this is the cell phone provider who provides the best service in our community, and it is an objective standard that is maintained by the CRTC. We know that TELUS is the best in this area, Rogers or Bell is the best in this area, and so that's who we're able to partner with. So, I mean, it is a multifaceted challenge, and it will take a few years for us to get over it. But then one of the issues is that, once you solve one problem, then all of a sudden the technology is advanced, and now we have to go through a whole new round of investment and growth. And so we need to keep the momentum on this. And so unfortunately, I'm not able to answer your question. I know you're frustrated, and we're frustrated out in our rural areas as well.
It wouldn't be so bad if they would at least spend the money that they say they're going to spend. I mean, if they're going to spend, I mean, even when it was 150 million, just 150 million, we were looking forward to having, I can't even remember the name of the company that we did an endorsement for now because it's so long ago. That would have been great, but it just seems to go away. I mean, they say they want to do it. Yeah, here's all this money. And then 2 years later, it's, well, we're going to put even more money into it. Well, I haven't seen the first money yet. So
one of the issues that we've seen with the Liberal government in every direction is that their success, their stated success in anything that they do is how much money they've spent on it. I give the analogy, they're much more like a boat that's just floating with the current, rather than paddling in a particular direction. And that's what I hope, as a Conservative government, we would make the benchmarks not so much how much money we spend on something, but are we actually getting an achieved, are we achieving a result that we're pursuing? That's something.
I'm also hoping that the provincial government can get involved in here. I know that they like to stand behind the pillar that says that communications is a federal jurisdiction. Yeah, I mean, I get it. But at the same time, I mean, we're provincial residents. And I think they need to start going to the wall a little bit, whether it's the NDP government or the Conservative government or whoever's in government. Frankly, I don't care. I want to see my residents get good, at least decent internet. Doesn't even have to be high speed. Even if I could depend on 10 megabits per second download, I'd be a happy camper. But I mean, I can't even get a tenth of that. So.
No,
Well,
thank you. I do have to get running soon.
Yeah,
Arnold?
I was gonna just thank Dane for joining us this evening and bringing the world that he's working in these days as his shadow cabinet position to Northern Alberta. Although he didn't have to come far, unlike some of my colleagues that I've had on here. I just want to make a plug for Northern Alberta. I typically call the riding the promised land. We are the honey capital of Canada, and we've got
dairy up there too.
We've got 7,500 dairy animals, so we're literally flowing with milk and honey.
There you go.
We've got the municipal districts of peace and opportunity, and we're all been settled on a promise called Treaty Number 8, and so it's literally the promised land. I guess I probably don't have to spend much time to convince Dane of that, seeing as he lives right next door, and I'm sure that the title of the promised land can spill over onto his area as well. But I do much appreciate you taking your time out of your evening, Dane, and joining us here in Northern Alberta. And I want to thank everyone else who's come on here. Much appreciate your engagement, and look forward to seeing you all in person very soon when this whole pandemic thing is over and we've all been vaccinated in our lives, return somewhat to normal, or whatever the new normal happens to be. But meeting in person and in face to face is what I'm looking forward to for sure. So thank you, everyone. Have a good night, and God bless you all.